The tragic story of Badfinger began in 1961 in the United Kingdom city of Swansea. They had a very dark and rocky run of it between 1961 and when they played their final note together in 1990. The story began in '61 with a band called the Panthers who later became known as the Ivies. Pete Ham played lead guitar, Ron Griffiths played bass, David Jenkins played rhythm guitar, and rounding out the lineup was Roy Anderson on drums. During the early days, they had trouble finding a name that stuck and had changed it several times. The Black Velvets, the Wild Ones, the Panthers, and finally they became known as the Ivies. For the next several years, they focused on honing their craft and becoming the best musicians they could be. By 1964 though, Roy Anderson, their drummer, had had enough and decided to part ways with the band. That opened the door for new drummer Mike Gibbons. This was when their luck started to improve, at least for a while. That year, they began to acquire the opening slots on many famous acts shows around their hometown of Swansea. Famous artists at the time such as The Who, the Moody Blues, the Yardbirds and others had decided to give them a shot and let them open their shows, exposing the young band to a whole world of new fans. Things were going very well and their future looked very bright, at least for the time being. By '66, they had hired a new manager named Bill Collins and had moved onto his estate where he was already managing another band at the time called the Mojos. It was crowded and chaotic, but it did allow them access to a small studio on the property that they used to make demos and also record several cover songs. They were signed to a 5-year contract where Collins, their manager's cut was 20%. Shortly after this signing, guitarist David Jenkins was accused by the other band members of being more into chasing women than he was performing and was asked to leave. He was replaced by a man named Tom Evans. As the contract was coming close to an end in the late '60s and still no major breakthroughs on the horizon, their manager had invited Mal Jenkins and Pete Asher from Apple Music to come see a show in London. Mal was a roadie for the iconic rock band The Beatles and Pete was the head of A&R. If anyone could help the struggling group, these guys could, and that is exactly what they did. Evans signed the Ivies to Apple in July of 1968. They became the first non-Beatle recording artists on the label. The group's first single, Maybe Tomorrow, reached the top 10 in several European countries and Japan, but only number 67 on the US Billboard Hot 100 and failed to chart in the UK. Following songs didn't do quite as well and Apple had decided to limit the number of records that would be released to the public, which angered some of the band members. The band also began to become increasingly discouraged with their label because they kept writing new music and everything they did seemed to be rejected and said not to be good enough. Frustration had begun growing within the band. They were about to receive help from none other than one of the Beatles themselves, Paul McCartney. Paul had heard what was going on with the band and wanted to offer his help. He had written a song for a movie soundtrack called The Magic Christian and had intended it to be a Beatles song, but instead, gave it to the young band and insisted they play it note for note the way he had written it. He knew it would be a hit. When he heard the finished product, McCartney was so pleased that he offered to produce 2 more original songs of theirs for the soundtrack as well. Carry On Till Tomorrow and Rock of All Ages were original songs by the band that they had written and was produced by Paul and put on the soundtrack. During this time was when both the band as well as their label had decided that the Ivies just wasn't a strong enough name for the band. They all agreed that a new name was in order. Where the name Badfinger came from is hard to tell. There are a few different versions of the story on the name change. Apple Cornel Aspinall suggested Badfinger referring to a song called Badfinger Boogie. Someone also suggested that the band was named after Helga Fabdinger, a stripper the Beatles had known in Hamburg. Whatever version of the story is true, the name Badfinger stuck and was agreed upon by both band and management. By 1969, changes to the group's lineup was about to be shaken up again. Ron Griffiths, who played bass, was now married and raising a child and was looking for more time at home with his wife and child. He had tired of the constant travel and chaos of the music industry. After searching for a new bass player, they decided to switch things up. Rhythm guitarist Tom Evans decided to switch over to bass duties, and they hired a new guitarist named Joey Molland. Badfinger was back and ready to play. Over the next couple of years, they recorded several songs. 1970, however, would prove to be the beginning of their descent. It started with the hiring of their new manager, Stan Polly. If only the band could have known what a huge mistake they had just made by signing that contract. Over the next few months, the band continued to tour and the sales numbers of their songs began to grow. People even began comparing them to the Beatles, who were the biggest band in the world at that time. The money was coming in, but where was it going? If the boys would have seen the financial reports coming in, it would have given them heart failure. Stan was not just taking a larger piece of the pie than he deserved, he was taking the pie itself and leaving before anyone else could touch it. This began to cause infighting within the band, and Evans and Gibbons had gotten into a huge argument in late '72, which led to drummer Mike Gibbons leaving the band, and that led to the introduction of new drummer Rob Stawinski. By the end of '72, many of Stan Polly's other bands that he was managing had started to accuse him of mismanagement. People were beginning to catch on. Apple Records wasn't doing so well either. Things were starting to look shaky for Badfinger. Newer singles wasn't doing as well as they had expected, which just added to all of the uncertainty of their already unstable future. Although he promised the band members that they would all be millionaires, that is far from what actually happened. Warner Brothers Publishing wasn't receiving any communication from Polly regarding the status of an escrow account of advance funds, which led to them terminating all future money to the band. Although they were doing well and selling out shows and selling albums, their money was now frozen. Between this and Joey Molland's wife taking an increasingly progressive role in band politics, tensions in the band came to a head, which led to yet another member leaving, guitarist Pete Ham, who was quickly replaced by Bob Jackson. The guys didn't have any idea yet, just how bad their financial woes would be. Ham, even though he had left the band, still thought that he would have millions coming in from royalties from previous songs and album sales for the work they had already done. He had decided to buy a new home for his wife, who had a child on the way. After signing the papers on the new home, a phone call from his former bandmates quickly let him know just how deep in trouble they were. Polly had taken the money and ran, leaving them broke. He hung himself in his garage after leaving a note to his wife telling her it was all because of Polly that he had committed suicide. Badfinger broke up soon after, and they had all gone their separate ways. Unfortunately, there was more tragedy to come. In the following years, several of the former band members decided to reunite and play together again. Also during this time, a judge had ordered Polly to pay the band a substantial amount of what he owed them, but they barely received half. After a heated argument in 1983 between Tom Evans and Joey Molland over royalties, Evans became the second member of Badfinger to commit suicide over unpaid royalties. In 1984, Molland, Gibbons and Jackson reunited as Badfinger along with Ol Wodka and Randy Anderson, and they continued on for quite some time. It wasn't until 2013, the issue of royalty payments had been resolved in court. The main songwriter receives 32% of publishing royalties and 25% of ASCAP royalties. The other band members and Collins share the rest. Revenue from album sales is shared equally, with 20% going to each member as well as Collins. In 1990, the year in which Mariah Carey covered the song Without You, the royalties for Ham's estate spiked up to $500,000. Former manager Bill Collins died in August of 2002. He was 89. On October 4 of 2005, Mike Gibbons died in his sleep at his home in Oviedo, Florida from a brain aneurysm. He was 56. Joey Molland's wife Kathy Molland died on March 23, 2009. Finally, the man who was the cause of all of the sorrow, Stan Polly, died on July 20 of 2009 in California. There are still certain ex-band members who still tour under their own versions of the band in order to keep the music and the legacy of the band alive. We wish them all well. If you enjoyed today's story, we hope you'll consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us more than you could ever know. We thank and appreciate you all so much. Links to all our social media and our merch are in the links below. Till next time.